Welcome to the Customer Success Playbook podcast that's all about elevating your customer success game. I'm Roman Trebon, and with me is my co-host, Kevin Metzger. We're here to bring you the latest insights, inspiration, and expertise from top leaders in this field of customer success. Kev, we got a great guest and topic today. You had sent me this article, this ebook to check out, and I was I didn't read it for a week. You're like, hey, did you read this ebook yet? And I said, no, I'll get to it. And when I finally did, I absolutely loved it. It was one of my favorite reads I've read this year, because there were so many times, Kev, when I was reading, I'm like, oh man, this makes so much sense, right? One of those aha moments. There were tons of aha moments in it. And what I loved about it, not only is it a quick read, but there's actual tactical things you're left with as well. So enough of me waxing poetic about this. Kev, why don't you introduce our guest and topic today?
Yeah, it's great. And I really enjoyed the book as well, and we're going to get into it with the audience. Today we're joined by Greg Daines, who gave us the ebook, his founder and CEO of ChurnRx, the industry's foremost expert on customer retention and growth. Greg regularly challenges conventional thinking with his disruptive data-driven approach that transforms companies by revealing opportunities and ideas that break the status quo. With his thought-provoking perspective and experience, he drives exceptional customer outcomes. Greg is very well positioned to discuss the current and future state of customer success. Greg holds multiple advanced degrees in business and economics from MIT and Cambridge University. He believes business has fundamentally changed and that old ideas no longer work. In this episode of the Customer Success Playbook podcast, we're going to discuss Greg's ebook, The 23 Ways to Reduce Customer Churn. In his research, Greg provides methods for reducing customer churn and groups them into basically three different strategies for addressing early churn, mid churn, and late churn. Greg, welcome to the show, and maybe we can get started by talking about kind of what early churn, mid churn, and late churn are.
You bet. Hey, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be on. So yeah, why the division? Well, one of the things that we've done is to study. So I was a founder, CEO multiple times, and one of the things that, if not the main thing that drove me crazy, was how hard it was to consistently make my customer successful at scale. One customer come in, they do really well, they'd go brag about you, and the next one looked just the same, but then they'd kind of just go sideways and never really worked out, and they'd churn out. That drove me nuts, right? One of the things that I wanted to do was, as I looked around, there were all these best practices people were talking about, but I couldn't tell, how they were justified. Where's the data, right? I'm sort of a data guy. I'm an economics background. So I realized we actually have a problem in this space. This is years ago, where we just don't have enough good research to justify, the decisions we make, and those decisions are not cheap. So we ought to probably do that. So I spent a lot of time on that. And one of the things that we found, among other things, is that our metrics are not doing us any favors. Churn rates, for example, are really bad, actually. They're very distorted because they don't just measure churn. They also, churn's in the numerator, but there's also a denominator, right? Yeah. That denominator is total accounts. Well, that can change, which means our churn rate can change, even if churn doesn't. Yeah. So, here we are going up and down. This is what people are experiencing. Churn's going up. Now the CEO rushes in and says, good job, churn went down. And you're like, I don't know what I did differently. And then the next month it's, hey, what's going on? Churn's way up. I don't know. I haven't changed anything, right? So that's actually mostly an artifact of the problem with measuring churn rates. So you can't even use your churn rate to measure your churn yesterday and today. So we really got to get away from that. And I realized that early on. So the simple solution is to look at cohort churn, right? Take a group and just watch what happens over time, right? How many of them survive? We draw these survival curves at ChurnRx. You can do it yourself. They're very useful because they remove that growth problem. But they also reveal something else. I'm getting to the early, mid, and late churn. They reveal that churn is not the same over time, right? A customer who leaves early, like in 60 days, for instance, leaves for different reasons than a customer who leaves after 4 years. They're different reasons, right? They're not the same. Right. But the way we manage churn, we compress them all into one and treat churn as churn. No, there are different kinds of churn. Early churn has its own separate set of causes, mid churn and late churn. So early churn, roughly speaking, call that first year. Okay. Mid churn, roughly speaking, second year. And third year and beyond is what we call late churn. And what do we know? Well, what we know, among other things, is that the reasons we thought customers were churning and have believed for years turn out to not be true. Okay, so the classic one is satisfied customers stay and unsatisfied customers leave, right? Happiness is what we're building. Actually, no. It turns out, and I wasn't the first one to discover this, the CEB people, those are the Challenge Yourself people, wrote this book 10 years ago called The Effortless Experience. And one of the things they had in there was this research that showed there was no correlation at all between customer loyalty and customer satisfaction. That was a shocker. It isn't even what they expected, certainly not what any of us expected. Well, since then, I've been able to test that over and over again because we do churn analyses at ChurnerX, so we get all this data. And one of the things that we test for all the time is customer satisfaction. What's the relationship between customer satisfaction and retention? And the answer is there isn't one. It's not that it's weak. It's zero. There's zero statistical correlation.
Just
right?
crazy.
It's crazy. Now this shocks people, but actually I can clear that up really easily. Anyone in customer success has had this experience. Have you ever had a customer leave and on the way out say what a great experience it was working with your company? Right? Yeah. Everybody's had that experience, probably yesterday, right? Have you ever had an experience where you've had the customer who's unhappy, right? And they keep renewing, right? Yeah. What gives? What is going on here? So that's actually our daily experience. So actually, when I show this data to, rooms full of CS people, I actually get people nodding their heads. They know this is true. It just has never been put together. So we have the benefit of everybody chose NPS recently in the last few years as their SAT score. So we can test this across huge data sets now, and we have very large data set, 1.6 million records. And so we test this, and the answer is it doesn't matter who we test it on, where we go, there is never a correlation. The only metric we've ever tested, we test dozens of metrics, the only one we've ever tested that never correlates with customer retention is satisfaction. And that's a shocker, but it should make some sense because what the heck is going on? What does matter, basically? And the answer is, by far the most predictive factor we've ever looked at of all the things we've looked at is customer results. Customers who get results stay 6 times longer on average than customers who don't. So, the customer might be having a great experience and leave because they're not getting results. They don't perceive that they are. Or they're having a horrible experience. I even had this experience once with Apple. They were my client for years in the Bay Area. I'd go over there and they were miserable. Worst client you could possibly have. Terrible, unhappy, constantly complaining, right? I'm never satisfied. And I got frustrated at one point. I just said, hey, you know what? If you hate us so much, why don't you just cancel? Don't say that to your clients, by the way. But that was a moment of weakness, right? And the guy looked at me kind of confused and said, why would we cancel when you make us so much money? And my reaction was to feel a little ashamed because why did I ever think it was about anything else? Where did we get this idea that we're all in business together, selling software and technology and tools to make each other delightfully happy? That's not realistic. So anyway, right. Early churn, mid churn, and late churn really have 3 distinct patterns. Early churn is fundamentally driven by the failure to get to first results. That's why customers leave early, right? Yep. Now, if they get to some result, and I don't mean full results, our data shows any result greatly extends the customer's lifespan. Okay, not forever, but a lot longer, okay? When they get to first results, well, why would they churn after that? Well, the answer is fewer do, right? Most churn happens early. But some do churn after that, and we found out why. It's essentially because they don't continually have clarity on their measured results over and over and over again over time. That's the main driver of mid-churn. And then, well, okay, but if they have that, will they ever churn? The answer is fewer do, but some do. And what drives that churn? Late churn? The answer is the failure to continually drive more results. There is a point at which what you did for me was exciting for a while, or it was important, but now I need more. Companies don't change. Their needs don't aren't static, right? And very frequently, a customer will leave you even though they've been phenomenally successful, simply because they graduate to a better set. They need more, right? So the reality is each stage is about, this is what I'm getting to the point. Each stage is about results. Early churn's about not getting to first results. Mid churn is not having regular materialization of your results. And late churn is not getting more or new results.
Yeah. And Greg, when you went into the study and you were looking at all the churn cohorts, and I think from looking at the 23 churn reasons, 70% are in that early churn. Was that your hypothesis going into it, that it would be weighted that much up early? Because as I was reading it, I'm saying to myself, salespeople underselling, salespeople overselling. I've seen this so often, and of course that's going to lead to churn. I was curious going into it if you had a hypothesis going in.
I mean, before I saw the decay curves, I really didn't have a theory. Yeah. I think I was like everyone else, just assuming churn's churn. Yeah. But when you see this curve, and it's essentially, it looks like a Nike swoosh backwards, right? It's steep and then less and less over time. So what does that tell us? It tells us most of the churn is early. And to your point, most of the causes are early. So if you look at my ebook, I divide them into these three groups. And you are one of the people who picked this up. Of the 23 reasons, 16 of them, right, have to do with early churn. And the majority of those have to do with things that happen even before they're a customer. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. Right? So what does that tell us? Well, this is actually the result of massive amounts of research, years and years of research. And what we found is there are not an unlimited number of factors we can statistically tie to churn. There are only so many, right? Maybe there's a couple dozen. And at least half of those, if not more than half, have to do with the way we market and sell customers in the first place. Now, that shouldn't be shocking. If you think about early churn, a customer who leaves in 2 weeks or 30 days or 90 days, right? That's very rapid. They're failing very early. Even if their contract doesn't expire till a year, they're still failing very early. What are the drivers of that failure? And once again, I go back to the fact that, if you look out into the CS world, there's millions of things we're supposed to do. But my clients, the companies I work with, they can't do a million things. They can't do 10 things. They have limited resources. We can maybe do 1 or 2 or 3 things well, right? Well, the good news is actually that's all you need to do, because when you look at your churn, you don't have every kind of churn. There's going to be a dominant mode. And for most SaaS companies, it's early churn. But even if it's late churn, that dominant mode allows you to focus your energy on the things that really matter. So if it's early churn, there are really just 2 major factors that drive early churn: bad fit customers and the inability to get good fit customers to their first result. So call it onboarding, onboarding to results anyway. And so, if it's just those 2 things, now it makes sense why all these factors matter. Deep discounting. Yeah. Does it affect churn? Oh yeah, very, very significantly, very consistently. The more you discount, especially past about 25% discount, the more it directly impacts churn. Why? Well, when you heavily discount, you're sending a message to the customer, this isn't a very big deal, it's not that valuable, you won't have to try very hard. So they don't try very hard, they don't get results, and they churn out.
One of the things that you talk about in early churn is speed. You mentioned it already, speed to first results, right? And I think one of the suggestions you make is scheduling your first onboarding meeting, basically, prior to even closing the sale. Can you talk a bit about what the statistics are around that and how you kind of came to that?
Yeah. So what we found, and I mentioned this, is that the customers who get to any result that's measurable have a significantly lower churn rate. So that's your first watershed moment. That's what you want to get to. That should be your primary focus, right? Okay, well then, the question is, why don't some customers get to a first result? And that allows us to really focus our attention on a subgroup. Here's another problem, I think, in the mentality we have with customer success is that we think all customers need customer success. No, they don't. Some of your customers come in and they actually know what they're doing. They're on it. They give the right attention to it. They follow your advice. They get to the result. Maybe they're even measuring their own result. Good for them. But that's a minority of our customers. So instead of a generic experience that applies to everyone, focus on the group that fails. And one of the reasons they fail is they never even get started. Now, that's not everybody, but that's a group. Why don't they get started? Lots of reasons. I like to say there's no such thing as a handoff for customers. There's only a hand down. And so, you end up with customers who just kind of lose their way pretty easily. Well, the best time to make sure they get to at least the first part, that kickoff moment, is while they're still in the sale, while they're still enthused, when you still have their attention. So that's just one strategy. And you think, gosh, that only applies to a small portion of my customers. Yeah, but only a small portion of your customers are churning.
Right.
It might be a big portion of the customers who churn, just never even get started. So that's just one example of that. And hopefully that makes sense. But anything, by the way, that helps you get customers who are, well, one of the factors that's at play here is that we're dealing, typically when you're focused down on the customers who fail that quickly, right? I'm ignoring bad fit customers who can't win. That's the definition of bad fit customer. Not that they don't win, they can't win, right? When you've focused in on a group that's not going to win very quickly, what you discover is they're mostly fairly low sophistication customers. They're not your biggest, most spectacular, most innovative customers, right? So they need help with more basic things. We need to look lower in the stack. We need to think lower in terms of where they're going to trip, right? So we want to remove obstacles. We want to take, for instance, overemphasis on lots of training is a mistake. Put the training in videos, put it in a web link they can get to very easily. Focus their attention on the 1, 2, or 3 things they can do now to get to their first result, however small. That's a big thing, right? So I want to take all the complexity out of that onboarding experience and focus on, here are just 3 things you can do in an hour and a half that will get you to your first result. And I'm going to focus you on doing that. Things like showing you the admin interface and how to configure advanced reports, that's later. Don't do that, right? That it's great for you get a cool, big, sophisticated customer and that's the first thing they want. Sure, show it to them. But most customers who are going to fail for really simple reasons. So we really want to focus on that. And as simple as it sounds, just getting them to their kickoff call, getting that scheduled and on the calendar is a big deal.
And I want to talk about the correlation between first result and the customer goals. So does first result have to be achieving a customer goal, or is it just a step on the way to the customer goal?
That's actually a really good question. I'm going to take 2 positions on it, and hopefully you won't go crazy with the contradiction. The first position is it has to be a measurable achievement of some business value, okay? Now, in many cases, that's actually really hard to measure or it's hard to achieve in a short period of time, okay? So if you're SAP, for instance, you're not getting there for 4 or 5 years, right? So that's my extreme example, right? But your solution is somewhere on that Slack at one end and SAP at the other end, right? How quickly, how low effort. So when I work with companies that have very sophisticated enterprise solutions that take months to implement, we will in fact make a big deal about milepost accomplishments on the way to business value. You just can't lose their attention. Here's the thing about early. The thing about early is that there's the most enthusiasm, energy, and attention you're ever going to get is right at the beginning, and it will rapidly diminish. It's a perishable resource, right? And so you want to use it and maintain it as long as possible. And one of the things I recommend to my clients is, if possible, break the project up so that a small piece of it that does lead to a measurable result, however small, can be done first. And then, right, rethink your process. Break it into smaller pieces and find a way to produce the first measure. So a classic example, I had a client that was sort of in the email marketing solution space. And I looked at their onboarding, and it was 6 weeks of really good expertise about how to market better and how to grow your list and all this stuff. And the idea was that, at the end of 6 weeks, you'd really be running. We shifted that to 4 days. In 4 days, you're going to get your first sales email out, and it's going to produce your first $1 of revenue.
So I want to go back real quick, Greg, to the sales aspect of it. Early on, we talked about the impact that has, because I think we've all seen, the divide or the siloed nature of the sales organization, where it's, we got to sell as much as possible. We got to get customers in, and they're doing, like you said, the deep discounting. There may be underselling. They're not maybe providing solutions. They're not really showing the real value. how have organizations, what strategy have they put in place to align sales so that they understand that it's not just about, it's not a numbers game of bringing, mass customers, it's bringing in the right customers, because who we bring in, it really does matter from long-term success.
Yeah, who we bring in and how we bring them in. Well, so the answer to your question is it's actually fairly straightforward to get aligned with sales, because their interests are aligned with ours. It's one of the great serendipities of my life to discover that the thing we want them to do is actually the thing they should want to do. It sells better. The thing that makes customers stay longer also sells better. So that, like, to me, that's, I don't know if the universe, if it had to be that way, but it did turn out to be that way. So I'm really excited about that. So what is the alignment? Well, the more customers, salespeople don't like it when the customers they sold churn. That's not a happy moment. And when it happens, they know they have to go replace that customer plus the increase for their quota. And so, the idea that they're just falling out, after they sell them is very disheartening. So that's one way to get on the same page with them. Okay. And it reduces the pressure on their constant, intense pressure to sell and grow their sales, et cetera. So that's one thing. But the other thing is, well, but then how do we get on we have aligned incentives. That's great. We can start there. That's the foundation. How do we get aligned and actually operate in alignment? Well, salespeople do something they call discovery. And discovery ought to be the very thing we most want them to do, because discovery, in theory, is where they find out what's driving this customer, what motivates them, what's about. Well, that's the thing I'm always talking about. What result are they here to get? Because if I can produce that result, they never leave, basically. Okay, but the problem is that the discovery is a very loose concept, as lots of things in sales are. And if you can help them with that, you're in a position to really get them aligned. So fundamentally, they think, and most salespeople think, that discovery is about finding out what will motivate the customer to buy, the prospect to buy the solution. That isn't very far off from what we want, but it's just a hair off. There's a subtlety there, right? What we want to know is what result are they here to get? So one of the things that we do, and we actually do at TurnerX, we actually do more training for sales teams than we do for CS teams on this process. And it's a very simple process. It's a skill anybody and everyone should learn. How do I get the customer to articulate properly the business outcome they're hoping to achieve? It's a simple verbal jujitsu. It happens in seconds, and it's very easy to do. Because one of the problems is, if you ask a customer what they want, what do they tell you? I want to install your software. I want that tool up and running, right? Whatever. That's not what they're here for. That's the thing we're going to do, but what's the results you want? So I just play that little game back, and there's a nice way to do it. We have a skills training on this, but essentially I get them to articulate properly, and I have to guide them. When salespeople have that skill, discovery becomes incredibly powerful. The second thing, write it down. What's the business result they care about? Second question is, how will we know when we've won? A year from now, let's project. How will you know this was worth it? Well, that just comes down to how will we measure it? What measure or proxy measure will prove to us that this worked, right? Okay, good. Now that I know that, as a salesperson, I'm in a position to sell you the right solution, right? Because actually what you should buy depends totally on what you're trying to achieve. Okay, so I can convince you of the right solution. Then I can also tell you the most important thing that we care about post-sale, which is what you'll have to do to achieve that. Yes, you have to buy this tool, but then you'll also have to change how you do X, Y, and Z. What's really cool about that simple process is that's an incredibly effective sales process. If you do that, it's effectively, by the way, challenger sale in different words and with a little more application and structure around them. But it closes deals like crazy, faster and for higher dollars. And so when we teach this to sales, you can think of it purely as a sales methodology. But how often is it then when they hand that to you? Here's the result they want, how it'll be measured, right? What's the right solution we sold them so they can get there, and what they've committed to do to get there. Oh my gosh, we've just solved the whole problem, right? Now, I've said it sells better, which it does, by the way, but it also has one other impact. I mentioned that bad fit is one of the biggest single drivers of churn. If you go through that process and the true answer is that the customer's looking for a result we don't produce, it also solves for that. It weeds that out, right? If I sincerely follow that process, we're not going to close that deal.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's good for sales too. That reclaims time back where I can go spend on customers who are a fit. So essentially, that model, those four things, the result, how it's measured, the right solution, and what they'll have to do, the behaviors, that little model is what we teach. It's a simple 4-box thing. Now, sometimes customers have more than one result they're hoping for. That's rare. Even in those cases, though, there's one that's number one. There's a primary one. That's the one we focus on, right? And especially in getting to first results. So if they hand that over, now we've got the same thing. We said, hey, is this right? Great. Here's what you're going to have to do to achieve it. Here's the fastest way to get there. Then they get there and they're excited and they say, what else can we do? We can hand that post onboarding to whoever owns that account. If it's the same person, that's fine. And say, okay, let's move on to the next thing you can do to improve these results, or the next result that you had listed. And then it's expansion.
Yeah.
Because, they may have something they hoped to do in the future. Guess what? We're going to get there, and I'm going to sell you more to do it. Mm-hmm. So the point is that one object, which we call a customer results strategy, that's the unifying lingua franca across the entire customer experience, beginning to end. And even in marketing, what does marketing want to sell? Products, tools, features? No, they want to sell benefits. If they go look at 20 of those customer results strategy, they're going to see common themes that they can message better, to target better. I mean, it just lines everything up beautifully.
Yeah, it's good too from a CS perspective for going forward with QBRs, and you now have the measurement you're looking to sit down with the customer with and discuss on a regular basis, discuss how you're achieving it or not achieving it, and what you can do differently to get there. Let's move towards some of the mid-churn questions.
Well, Kev, let me jump in before we jump off real fast. I got to ask Greg this one, because I've seen one that jumped out at me where is the focus on, and we talked about NPS and zero correlation, right? And I think number 15 you have on your sheet is focus on unengaged, right? Because I've seen companies do survey results and say, oh, we got a 50% response rate. And they focus all this time on these detractors and all these. And I'm like, what about the 50 who didn't respond? And there's no attention to those customers, right? Like, it's almost like they're in a vacuum. So talk about that a little bit. And then, is there a point where if you don't get a customer engaged, where it's going to, you've lost them, right? If you don't get, you talked about first result, that if they're not engaged at a certain point, then your window is closed.
Absolutely. It turns out that these NPS surveys are useful in a backward kind of way, because what we found is that there's no difference between customers who say they hate you and say they love you in terms of their lifespan. Zero. But there's a huge difference between them and the customers who didn't respond to the survey. We get like 10 to 15% response rates. If you didn't respond to that survey, you are twice as likely to churn. Like, you have half the customer lifespan. So it's a signal of engagement, and that's really valuable. To your point, go look at the ones who didn't answer the survey. They're the ones who are in trouble. Well, what is that? That's more of a general point, actually. I talked about the ones who never get to their kickoff. I talk about the ones who kind of disengage because they run out of steam during the process and never get to results. This engagement issue is a central issue. And one of the reasons we talk about results so much is it's the only way to keep them engaged, because it's the thing they want. You have to focus on the thing they want, right? They didn't come here to be happy. They came to get results. Okay. So one of the backwards ways to use your NPS survey or your SAT survey or whatever surveys you're doing, in fact, is just to look at who didn't respond. That's a health risk signal. Okay. But the other thing is, we have this data, which is fascinating. It came, first time I ever became aware of it was this guy who was the former COO at Sun Microsystems. And this company, was a big deal in the 90s, and they were a huge computer company. And essentially they had tried to understand their customer churn problem by dividing their customers into two groups: customers who'd had a negative experience and those who hadn't. And the assumption was, we need to go solve for what's driving these negative experiences. But somebody thought to, just as an afterthought, measure what the average lifespan was. And what they discovered shocked them. The customers who'd had negative experience has twice the lifespan of customers who'd never had a negative experience. And they were very confused about that. And I don't think they ever really found their right way to the answer. We have proven that that's true. In fact, our research reproduces that very consistently every time. If you have customers who've had negative tickets, I don't mean the tickets like answer a question or reset my password, negative experiences, are more likely to stay. Well, why? Is it negative experiences causing our customers to stay? Of course not. Those are an artifact of engagement. It's a signal that they're trying, right? And the customers who are trying are much more likely to win than the customers who aren't trying. So there's another point about this whole engagement dimension. We need to understand what causes customers to get disengaged and follow that train of thought, right? And so that's again the focus on results, the thing that grabs their attention the most. By the way, this goes back to the QBR issue, and now I am going to transition into the mid-churn issues because they're the same. Why do people hate QBR? QBRs are a waste of time. No one should do them. They're a disaster. Should we not meet with our customers? Of course we should, but not as a QBR. What we need to do is focus on what we call an EBR. Simple idea. Show them their results and tell them how they can get better results. We have this data. One of the interesting things about the results data is people say, oh, I don't know if I want to show my customers their results because not all of them are very good. Guess what? Our data shows consistently, if you show customers their results and they're terrible, they still stay twice as long as customers who you didn't show the results to. Why? You think that would just be, okay, it's time to leave. We just got proof we're not getting results. Well, we've studied customers who do this, and because it's an interesting question, and they actually consistently say something which is very sophisticated, I think. They say, well, okay, I'm not getting good results, but at least this vendor measures them. If I switch to the other vendor, they don't even bother measuring my results. How will I ever know? I'm sticking with the horse that's actually proving, right, whether it's working or not. It's a signal that they believe it will eventually work. And they're right, by the way. That's actually true. Companies that really genuinely, sincerely want to know how well you're doing are much more likely to get you there.
Very good. So Greg, a little off topic from the ebook, but something we've been asking our guests a lot is, how do you see AI coming into the industry and impacting it, and especially with the type of research you're doing?
Potentially, there's two sides to that I've been kind of watching. One side I'm very familiar with, which is the use of that technology to study data, right? So a lot of machine learning, AI type technology we leverage heavily. We're looking for relationships in data that are very compelling over time and lots of data, et cetera. So that's already, I think, having an important impact, and I think there's a lot of upside to that. The other side, which is this more communication-based AI, right? Language models, et cetera. A lot of people are talking about how that, could fill the need that people fill at the moment, customer success managers. I'm a little circumspect on that, and here's why. My view of an effective customer success manager or person is really, you can tell, very narrowly focused on how quickly they can get you to measured results and then help you get more. I think that to the degree that these language models can understand the mechanics of how your solution produces benefits, sure. But I haven't seen that. I've seen them just be good at mimicking conversation. And one of the things I just have never seen data to support is the idea that the relationship is really important to long-term retention. I know we believe it. I know we've acted like that for years. There's no data to support that. I don't see that. So to the degree that it just replaces the talking head, I don't see it. To the degree that it can build more structured, more rapid, progressive models of driving customers effectively to change and get results, that could be cool. And there is I think there's a glimmer of hope that it potentially could go there, but it's not going to go there unless you train it against those models. And the fact is that the majority of companies that I see haven't even built those models. They haven't stopped to think clearly. How do customers produce results? What exact behavior changes lead it? What's the shortest route? How do I simplify that and remove? Just the work to consolidate that is what I hope clients do, and it's extremely valuable. Having that allows us to sell and market right? So I think if you built that, there's some potential there, and that could be interesting.
Very cool. Roman, do you think we're up to rapid fire?
No, I think we've monopolized Greg's time probably enough today, and really, Greg, this has been terrific. We save at the end, Greg. We got 5 rapid fire questions for you. These are the real hard hitters here for you. So I hope you're ready for this. Okay.
Okay, go.
All right. What's one hobby you have outside of work that helps you unwind?
Reading and journaling.
Oh, nice. Early bird or night owl?
Early bird.
Early bird. One place you'd like to travel where you've never been?
I want to go to Croatia this year. I think that looks really interesting.
Oh, nice. Do you have a favorite book or a book recommendation for our audience?
Right now, I'm reading a fascinating book called The Master and His Emissary. It's about right brain versus right hemisphere, left hemisphere. Essentially, the way those two hemispheres conflict to create our understanding of perceptions. Very fascinating.
Awesome.
Sounds cool.
And last one, Greg, where can our audience find you if they want to learn more and reach out and get in touch with you around your work in churn and how you're helping organizations?
You bet. Yeah. Well, my newsletter that you can sign up for and get free content every week is at gregdaines.com. Come see me at LinkedIn, where I post a lot of stuff. LinkedIn/Greg Daines. Of course, if you're interested in more about what we do, we can go look at churnrx.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Greg. And with that, it's a wrap for the Customer Success Playbook. We hope you found our conversation with Greg insightful and it helps you come up with strategies to reduce churn with your customers. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, comment, and share it with your friends and colleagues. You can find us on LinkedIn at Roman Trebon and at Kevin Metzger. Connect, share your feedback on the show, and give us any suggestions on future topics and guests we should have on. As always, thanks for listening.
Keep on playing.